Welcome to the Science for Sport podcast, where we dive into stories and insights that drive peak performance. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind the science of success. Here's your host, Richard Graves.
Hello and welcome to the Science for Sport podcast. I'm your host, Richard Graves, and in this week's episode, we're taking a look at technology and medicine and the increasing impact they both have on professional athletes. Joining me to discuss this are two rugby league players who've experienced success at the highest level of the game at club level in this country. Scott Taylor won the grand final with the Wigan Warriors before winning back-to-back Challenge Cup trophies at Hull FC, whilst Ben Jones-Bishop has won multiple grand finals, the World Club Challenge, and appeared in two Challenge Cup finals, all with the Leeds Rhinos. Both have had playing careers spanning well over a decade, so let's hear from them now.
Bringing you powerful stories and insights to elevate your performance. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Scott Taylor, Ben Jones-Bishop, hugely delighted to have you on this week's podcast. Two men who know all about the modern game in rugby league. Bish, a 16-year career and still going. Scott, well, you had a successful career of 14 years or more. Now you're moving into coaching as head coach of League One side Goole Vikings. So for the listeners that aren't perhaps familiar with your stories, tell them a bit about who you are and what your background is. And Scott, you can go first.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Richard. I'm Scott Taylor, professional rugby league player, retired last year, playing for clubs along the lines of Kingston Rovers, Wigan Warriors, Hull FC, won the grand final and a few other major trophies, and former England international, got to cap my country a few times and playing the World Cup in 2017. So I feel like I've had a lot of experience at the top of the game in rugby league, and I've took the first step on the coaching ladder and becoming head coach of a new professional rugby league team going into the Championship League One at the RFL League. Yeah, exciting times.
Absolutely. And Bish, as we said there, 16-year professional career. You started a year earlier than Scott, still going strong.
Yeah, still going, still enjoying my rugby, still fit and healthy. But yeah, started at Leeds, came through that academy system there. Was part of that group, won a couple of grand finals there. Spent a year on loan at Harlequins to sort of improve my game and learn the fundamentals, and then jumped in the Leeds team. Stayed there for quite a period of time, and then 2014, I believe, 15, moved to Salford. Did a year there, and then spent another 5 years at Wakefield. Yeah, a lot, and now I'm playing part-time rugby now. I did 1 year at York, and I've been at Sheffield. This is the third season at Sheffield now as well. And along the way, I had some experience with the England national team in a few Four Nations squads, and then played for Jamaica at the World Cup, their first World Cup, and I was the first try scorer for the country. So that was pretty special.
Yeah, quite an honour. I was reading before this edition of the Science for Sport podcast up on both of you. Between you, over 250 professional rugby league tries, 200 of those scored by you, Bish.
Correct.
Just the 50 for Scott. But your careers actually crossed at Salford, didn't they? Was that 2015?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Tag actually took me out in a training session once. Yeah, I've enjoyed Tag. I think it's probably I've known a Tag. We played together at England Nights before that, but then sort of got to know Tag a bit better, and then obviously through that went into sort of our love for American football, the NFL, and fantasy, and it's sort of since then it's been a good friendship.
At that point, Scott, did you ever think that your career would come to an end before Bish, that you'd still be going strong whilst you were taking the leap into coaching?
No, I look, Bish is an ultimate pro. Seeing him day in, day out that year at Salford, and really looks after himself. Very quick, very talented, but also a very good IQ of the game. A lot smarter probably than me, and why he's probably took a bit less cannon fodder over the years. But no, I was very proud of the career I had, and everyone says I retired maybe too early and I could have played that 1 or 2 years. But for me, I'm just a very competitive person, and In the middle of the game, it's a bit different as well, especially if you did go down the leagues. In the middle, it's a bit rough and bustle, and I just knew that with how I am, the type of bloke I'm wanting to go out my way and not just sort of take another few years in the game when I won't be 100% committed. I knew I wanted to be a coach. I'd done my coaching badges. I'd coached for 5 years in a men's amateur rugby league setup, and I was just biding my time to transition at the right time when I thought, do you know what, I'm ready to call it a day now. I've got nothing more to prove on the field.
Let's talk a little bit about that then, Scott, because as you say, predominantly you played up the middle of the park. You're a prop forward by profession. You're 3 years younger than Bish. He'll probably appreciate me saying that. But you decided to call it a day at the end of 2023. And you played in an era when physically the professional rugby league player was bigger, stronger, arguably faster. The contacts certainly had more force than what you'd see in the game, say, even 20 years ago. To what extent did that week in, week out physical battering play a part in your decision ultimately to step away from play?
It was the major part arguably. It is tough, and the hits you take, the constant battle, and that's not just in games, that's in training as well. You got to train how you want to play. I feel I'm a very competitive person, and I like to try and lead by example on the training park as well. And I found every year it was more and more rehab away from the field, more and more time in the physio room creeps up, and it's frustrating as well because you want to be out there all the time with the lads, and as you get older, you can't tend to do that, and the injuries pile up, and it takes more and more effort to get out there on the field. Then all of a sudden, I started having a family quite late. I've got a 2-year-old son who just turned 2, and you start thinking about life after rugby and the way you're walking around already, and the injuries you're putting up with already, and maybe the long um, sustained injuries that could stay with you after the game as well, and knowing that you still want to be able to run around the field with your son and be able to pick your son up. And I was starting to progress a few injuries where I knew they could have a major effect on me the rest of my life potentially. So I was also at the time as well thinking my health and mind is more important now, especially in a sport where I felt I'd reached the top and accomplished everything I needed to on the field.
How do you look at that, Bish? Because let's say your career's still ongoing. Now, fine, by trade you're a winger, so the natural perception is, oh well, there isn't as much contact. But as I've just said, the rugby league player has got bigger. The game is more physical, and there is more expected of the backs as well. So, what is it, if anything, that you've done to ensure that you look after your body and you're still in a condition where you can play at a high level?
Yeah, that's it. The modern game now, your outside backs are sort of your forwards on the first sort of one to three players to get us out of the backfield. So for me, as I've got older, I've sort of learned recovery is massively important. I invested while I was at Salford. I had an ACL injury. I invested in it's called a Game Ready, which is like an ice compression machine. I use that a lot now. Now I'm later on in my career, and I've sort of eased back on the quantity of what I do a lot now. Back then the game used to be fitness, fitness, fitness. We'll run you and run you and run you until you can't run anymore. Whereas now it's a lot of GPS numbers and look managing your workload and what you're doing in pre-season. And if you've gone really hard one week, you'll ease off the next week, sort of thing like that. So now it's a lot more for me. It's about the quality of work rather than the quantity of work. So I'm looking at getting some intense sessions in, and then when the coaching staff and the strength and conditioning team think I've done enough, then I'll ease off a little bit, and then so mainly for me it's massively about my recovery. Making sure straight after games I'm recovering, I'm eating right. I've really focused the last sort of 18 months on my sleep, it is tough with two young kids, but it's getting your head down and making sure you're recovering, which means I can get out there on the pitch and still be at my best.
Has your self-awareness during the course of your career improved? Because obviously, if we take you back to the end of the 2011 season, I think it was highly publicised at the time that you were diagnosed with a medical condition. I don't know whether that was picked up just purely because you were playing professional sport, or it's something that happened to be picked up regardless. But talk to us a little bit about how that came about and what the effects have been in a lasting sense on you.
Yeah, so it was my first season being selected in the international setup, and usually when you do that, you come back a little bit later in pre-season. So you come back after Christmas, and you generally have 4 weeks before the season starts again. So you come back, you get into it, and I'm a little bit behind in some of the stuff that we're doing. So the coaching staff sort of thought, oh, first time in internationals, he's taking the mick a little bit here. So. But no, generally I was training, not seeing much improvement. The short stuff, the sprint stuff were fine. It was the more the long endurance stuff. And then we went through the season, and I sort of saw parts of my game where I'm like, it was a bit worrying if I'm honest, because I didn't really know what was happening, but I knew I wasn't taking any shortcuts. I was training hard. And then the next preseason came around, and because of the last preseason, I was pushed a little bit harder. And we have a Boxing Day game every year, Leeds and Wakefield. And sort of in the build up to that, we have some tough sessions the week before. And in one of those sessions, I just had to pull out. I got a bit lightheaded. The doctor pulled me out, had a look at me, sent me to the hospital, did some blood tests, and it come back that I had blood clots. And then from there, it was a period of 6 months out. Well, initially we were told 3 months out. You take your blood thinners. Hopefully, things improve, and then being a contact sport, they weren't keen on me continuing. But we saw some specialists, and we sort of adapted. It got to 3 months. I weren't quite ready, so it was another 3 months. So 6 months in total, and I came back. And it was like honestly, it felt like I was a new person. I had new lungs, because everything that I was doing before that was a struggle now was a breeze, really. And then everything went fine, carried on, and then 8 years later, the same thing happened again at Wakefield. This time, though, I was sort of aware of what happened the first time. We got onto that straight away. Again, it was the long endurance stuff in pre-season. Got some checks done, and again, the same thing happened. So again, it was a period out for 6 months. This was during when the game had sort of stopped for, not stopped, but behind closed doors during COVID. I came back towards the back end of that, and then so since then it's sort of now I'm managing myself, massively. I've got a watch where I measure all my heart rate and stuff like that. I'm looking at things, even the fitness I'm doing. I've got my own benchmark tests that I do, and if I can't do them, then I'm off to ask questions to doctors and stuff like that. And so it's an ongoing thing, really. And while I'm playing sport, because unfortunately you can't take the medication that I'm prescribed while you're playing, due to blood thinning and the damage it can cause with contact. So yeah, that's just an ongoing thing from here out throughout my career. So yeah, it's like I said, I try my best to stay on top of it, but it's just regular blood tests is sort of what I do to make sure medically that I'm okay.
And is it fair to say that, and this goes to both of you, that this is symptomatic of the increased awareness, the increased player welfare that's in place now in professional sport? Because let's be honest, certainly with a game like rugby, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when it was in the amateur code, quite often there's a tough man image about playing a sport like rugby, isn't there? And if you're tired or pulling out of training sessions, it was seen back then as a sign of weakness. Whereas from what you seem to be saying, red flags were raised, and the reaction was, let's get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, I think that's massively important now. As you said, teams now have all got your designated player welfare officers. That's something that weren't happening in the beginning of my career. And I think that just the way the sport is now, it's very high octane, high paced, high impact. Every year, people seem to be faster and stronger. So yeah, looking after your body and sort of measures put in place that they do now around head injuries and stuff like that I think it's vitally important. Just as Tag said there, we are lucky to play sport. I deem myself very lucky, but it's a very short period of time. And there's life after sport as well that you've got to make sure that you're more than capable of functioning to do after. So yeah, I think nowadays it's it's paramount really in sport.
Yeah, and Scott, I guess given what you've said a little earlier as well about the physicality of playing it up front in the pack in rugby league, you'll have seen the care, the attention that players get, the welfare provisions put in place change just in the course of your career. What's your experience?
Yeah, I'd say the improvement's been huge from when I debuted back in 2009. The improvements, the research, the way you're looked after as a player, the head testing they do the testing obviously before the season, during the season, send you off to see specialists, even simple things like the heart scans, and setting that up pre-season after obviously the unfortunate events of Danny Jones, who was actually playing in a lower league team at the time professionally, and the heart screening, what's coming to the game now, as well as then, like you said, for me down the middle, a very high concussion sort of position what I played, and I've been on the back of quite a few concussions in my career. And one thing they did for me on top now, what they brought in the last year or two, is when you retire from the sport, they're more than happy to send you across to Manchester for a CT and MRI scan on your brain, and sort of see if there is any early signs of your MNDs, what's obviously been more associated to rugby league lately, and CT and stuff like that. And when I finished my career and the games I'd played, it was one of the best news I got when I retired. The fact that they'd scanned my brain, found a brain first and foremost, which is always a positive. And then to say that I had a healthy brain, they could see on my brain where some of the concussions had been, but they were all healed and no early onset of dementia or anything like that. To get that sort of green light after the career I had was just very positive, and something what I just knew, even going back a few years, that wouldn't have been available at the time. You've had to spend a lot of money to go and do that.
How big a concern is it for a professional rugby league player? You used the word relief there when you got the news that it was all clear. Obviously, over the last decade, there's been a greater focus. The spotlight shone brighter on concussions in sport and the effects it can have in later life. When you're actually playing, is it something you think about, or is it something that becomes more prominent the nearer you get towards the end of your playing career?
No, I think it's something you don't think about when you're playing. When you're in the heat of the battle, you don't. There's obviously just a lot more awareness and a lot more welfare now, like Bish said, around the game and around the sport. And rightly so. At the end of the day, whether you signed up a year ago or 30 years ago, for me, you knew what you were signing up for. When you become a rugby league player, you could play or you couldn't play. You knew what you were signing up for. And there was also some precautions there you could put in place to give you a better chance of preventing getting injured, and the way you looked after yourself in your recovery, or if you wore shoulder pads or a scrum out, there was options there. It's just great to see how much it's evolved in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, the awareness around it, and seeing players medically retiring because of the specialist advice and stuff you've seen recently in players like Lachlan Coote, a big overseas Australian player who come over and putting his welfare first, not getting forced to play anymore. That's just outstanding to see, and the fact that they're looking after you as a player and giving them options available. But they also is in that back of your mind, of course, what damage you could be doing. You've seen so many previous players be diagnosed with dementia, and I know a close friend of ours, Rob Burrow, was all close to. There's no, at the minute, scientific proof to say that him playing the game caused MND, and same with Doddy Weir in rugby union. But when you know people getting diagnosed with diseases like that who played the same game as you, of course, there's that little nagging thing in the back of your mind, hoping that you're going to be all right and not get something one day because of what you've put your body through.
Yeah, certainly. And Ben, I know that throughout your playing career, anybody familiar with you will have always seen you wear a scrum cap. The first thing that I've heard people say is, "Oh, he plays in the backs. Why does he need a scrum cap?" It's obviously been an aspect of the game that you've had a great awareness of since the first day you stepped onto the rugby field.
Yeah, well, that came about in my debut year in the Super League. I went down on loan to the capital and played for Harlequins, and about maybe 5-6 weeks in, I fractured my skull. I clashed heads, just innocuous, carrying the ball, clashed heads with someone, just between my eyes there, just fractured my skull. And as a result of that, I needed an operation more cosmetics to sort that out. And then from there, I wore a head guard from that point. I don't know the statistics behind head guards and what they do and what they don't do, but I probably back end of my Leeds career, I did get knocked out wearing a head guard. I got picked up and put, dumped on my back and my head bounced off the floor. So, I have been knocked out wearing one, but obviously it adds that extra layer of protection. And for me, it just sort of gave me a bit of security as I was younger, to get involved, because a lot of my injuries have always been when I was younger. I was quite a late developer. I think I came through because of my skill rather than my physical ability, my pace. So I did carry I was carrying not a lot of weight into these big collisions. So yeah, but then later on in my career, as I got going, and generally I played rugby sevens, and I left my scrum hat in the changing rooms. It was always part of my kit, my boots, my gum shield, my head guard, and because it was a new thing, I was a bit panicking about where I'd come on, backs or forwards, proper scrums, proper line outs. I just forgot it and left it in the changing rooms, and then from that point onwards, I've not worn it since. But yeah, generally earlier on in my career, it was just an added layer. Just a bit of confidence really for me, along with obviously recovering from my injury that I suffered.
Yeah, for sure. Let's close by reflections and lessons learned from both of you. I mean, Bish, you're obviously entering your 17th season as a pro or semi-pro rugby league player. When you look back on the previous 16 seasons, what's the biggest thing that you take about the way the sport's evolved and the advancement of how science, be it medical or tech, has been advanced in rugby league, and what do you take from it?
I think the biggest thing for me is the GPS. It's the mileage, the tracking your mileage. Generally now rugby league going on last season. Our first game was the end of January. We finished the end of September. The playoffs, if we would have made that, would have been the mid to end of October. So you're playing for 10 months of the year. You get a little break and you're straight back into pre-season. So I think that's been the biggest advance really I've seen, and probably has benefited me. As a young kid coming through, you can run all day, but now as an older player with miles on the clock, I think it's vitally important that your workload's managed, which allows you to deliver the best on the field. And if you're going into games fresh, you're very much less likely to get injured in those games. Carrying knocks and things like that. So. Probably that for me. It's it's an attritional game, and I think the sort of capping and sort of having benchmarks on your mileage and what you do is massive.
And Scott, in many respects, you're now hunter turned gamekeeper, starting out a new career, head coach of the newly formed Goole Vikings, heading into your first pre-season. What do you take from your experience of playing on the field, and how will that translate into the type of head coach you become for younger professionals now looking to make their way in the game?
Yeah, for me, obviously we touched a bit, but player welfare is a priority for me. It's the first time I'm going to sort of the semi-pro environment from full-time, day in, day out. Some of these boys who are coming to train for me have got jobs as well during the day jobs. Some of them are grafting. So player welfare for me is a top priority. Not forcing people to play, guilt tripping them, full-blown honesty. The adaptions of game I love is with the around the head knocks and stuff like that, just the decisions took out of them, depending on the age of the player. If they're around about, like I said, 17, 18, it's an automatic stand down for potentially 10 days rather than a 7 days to an older senior lad like Ben or myself. So they are looking after them young lads. We know how keen they want to play, but they are thinking about their future in the game and their future life by just taking decisions out of their hands, whether you're saying you're okay or not. There's just that automatic rule there. Well, you stood down for this long, which I do love because they are protecting the youth of today. And me just finding that balance, being smart with them. The GPS is a big thing, like Bish says, and just that feedback off the players. Obviously, a lot of teams do it now. The wellness sheets, sort of just getting a feel for how they feel out of 10. How many hours have they slept? If you've not slept, why haven't you slept? What's going on in your life? And being that soundboard for the players and build a relationship where they can trust you and tell you everything what's going on, because as a coach you need to know what's going on in your players' lives to get the best out of them.
Yeah, and just picking up on that, I'll put this to both of you. You said there, Scott, being a sounding board, having open communication. How important do you both feel it is to have that in order to be successful?
I think it's a top priority, especially for me as an head coach now, for you to have that trust with your players and the players have your respect, without realising they'll all give that extra 1, 2, 3% for you. I've seen it time after time under the top coaches. And for me personally, trying to be that guy now, me giving that back to them as well, knowing that I'm there for them, it's a huge part of one of my top priorities as a head coach now.
And I think it's massive in especially semi-pro rugby because, as Scott said there, a lot of boys, they do the rugby for fun. They've got the day jobs. Some might sit in an office. A lot of manual workers. So, you're working 9 to 5, doing stuff, on your feet all the time, and then you come into training at night. I think it's important that you have that conversation, with your conditioner, with your coach. How you're feeling, whether you can be pushed tonight, whether you need to take a step back and stuff like that. So that sort of been my massive experience difference from, full-time professional to now part-time semi-pro. Just the workload and what players do, away from the rugby.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, it's been a fascinating insight into the life of a professional athlete and into the life of a professional rugby league player as well. Really appreciate the time you've both given up. And I guess all that's left to say is best of luck in your debut season as a head coach, Scott.
Thank you.
And equally, we'll be keeping a keen eye out to see how the success goes on the field in a 17th season as a semi-pro rugby league player. It's quite a career and it's still got some mileage to run yet, Ben.
I hope so. Looking forward to it. Big year.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Huge thanks to both Scott Taylor and Ben Jones-Bishop for joining me on this week's podcast. And if any of the issues we discussed interested you, or you want to know more about the Academy, then you can do so by going to our website, scienceforsport.com. If you enjoyed the pod, then please help spread the word by sharing it with a coach, a colleague, an athlete, or a friend. Remember, the wider we spread the net, the easier it is for us to get top-class athletes and professionals at the top of their industry to come on the podcast. That's just about it from me this week, except to say a huge thank you to you for downloading the podcast, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Subscribe to the Science for Sport podcast now, wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more insights, resources, and to join the Academy, visit scienceforsport.com and connect with us on social media by searching for @ScienceForSport. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.